We all know the essential elements required to make a compelling horror movie: the monsters, the victims, the visuals, the music, and the effects. But what of the opening credits? The following 10 opening credits will make you think twice about ever coming in late to the theater again. So with that in mind, I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 more scariest horror movie opening credits. Number 10. In Fear. Chances are you haven't seen Jeremy Loverine's indie horror In Fear, but the director's entry into the countryside is awful canon packs tension like a suspension bridge from its opening second. Production company logos are paired with the sound of ordinary answering messages from protagonist Tom to Lucy, his prospective date to a music festival in Ireland, setting up the film's plot before plunging us into the titles. The abstract title sequence proceeds to establish the tone for the movie to come, with images suspended in lettering, quite literally placing the events of the film within the word fear. The credits depict what we can assume to be Tom and Lucy's journey on the ferry to Ireland, before diving into more impressionistic territory, with snatches of newspapers reporting violence and destruction, flies feeding from unidentified meats, haunted-looking rural locations, and a car crash, which may be the key to unlocking several of the feature's mysteries. Bathed in single-color filters, these images are straight out of the horror playbook, and are backed by an electric keyboard and the kind of tension-building atmospheric sound effects we wouldn't expect to find so soon in the picture. The contrast and escalating violence of the sound and visuals puts us on the back foot, undoing the seemingly ordinary premise and giving us plenty to worry about for the film to come. Number 9. Ringu. Hideo Nakata took the world by storm in the late 90s, with the era defining Ringu, popularizing J-horror for a global audience, and spawning an urban legend about a videotape that, after viewing, gives you just 7 days to live. This captivated audience's imagination so profoundly that adaptations of it are still being made today. The cornerstone for all of this, of course, is the original movie's opening credits, which established an atmosphere and tone from which to construct a dynasty. Kenji Kawai's score, which Hans Zimmer echoed in the US remake, opens on a black screen with music that is neither discernibly acoustic nor electric, and which, as the credits progress into simple titles over black flowing water, is accompanied by a subtle soundscape of elemental and guttural effects, as if the wind and water are themselves servants of the film's monster Sadako. The water fills the entire screen and buries the perspective, disorientating us by leaving no point of focus, no horizontal line, no sense of angle, and constantly shunting the eye right to left. Capped by a final transition into the movie proper, the river and titles dissolve into the static of a cathode ray screen, hitting the film's 2 major points of horror in one short sequence: the water of the hidden well and the curse of the videotape. It's cold, it's abstract, and it chills you to the bone. Number 8. The Brood. The Brood invites us into a reality where one mentally ill woman can conjure hideous feral offspring from her own body, all of whom inhabit a telepathic hive mind that allows her will to manifest outside of her psychiatric facility. So yeah, it's a David Cronenberg film. But before any of this has the opportunity to unfold, we have the title credits, a simple sequence featuring colored text on a plain black background, variations of which Cronenberg used on many of his early to mid-period pictures. The driving force of this one is the score. The first Cronenberg movie to have an original soundtrack, the music was composed by Howard Shore, and yes, the Howard Shore, in his film score debut, and employs a string-led chamber orchestra to uncanny effect. Adopting the sound of the classic horror title and playing with it, Shore, who admits to working around the edges of the subconscious, evokes established scores like Bernard Herrmann's Psycho, while gifting the form a new sense of danger. His composition spikes and whoops, presenting something familiar before whipping it in unexpected directions at crucial moments, such as on the film's title, with the simplicity of the visuals amplifying the emotional impact of the music. But this is only one of many unsettling contributions from Cronenberg and Shaw, beginning a long partnership in which each became a defining part of each other's work, while redefining the relationship between horror sound and imagery. Number 7. The ABCs of Death. Anthology horror movie The ABCs of Death doesn't quite get the love it deserves from the community, despite having had 12 years out in the world. Featuring entries from horror directors across the globe, it is impossible to summarize, and yet, in terms of the spirit of the thing, the opening credits manages this a treat. Featuring a house filling with blood, pouring from open pipes and seeping upwards out of the floorboards, we are transported with the overflow, first below, then above, witnessing the fine details of the blood creeping through the home. Quick cuts transport us between shots, snap zooms take us closer, time is sped up and down at irregular intervals, and all the while the movie flickers, a degraded quality infecting the images. The sequence feels like a roller coaster ride into hell, and given it has the job of teeing up some 26 short horror films, it does a tremendous job, building itself out from the established visual and auditory vernacular of horror, referencing a series of established properties, not least Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. That the blood coats and carries a collection of children's building blocks, which wind up spelling out the title, is just the ghastly cherry on top. Number 6. Martys. One of the most wretched movies of the modern age, psychological horror Martys opens with a child, Lucy, fleeing from abuse in her underwear, bloodied, injured, and screaming. This segues into the credits, in which a reporter tells of how she was held captive in a local building. While exploring the building, detailing the torture and misery Lucy experienced during a prolonged period, before transitioning to her life in care. This sequence is as scary for what it doesn't show as what it does, leaving much of the horror up to our imaginations, but coaching us along with small details and sounds that don't always jive with the images on screen. What follows ought to be an optimistic or upbeat sequence showing Lucy recovering and making a close friend in the children's home, but the style of the footage, with burnt edges and a large encroaching darkness ringing the images, intentionally juxtaposes this dewy-eyed ideal. The final and prevailing image of all, however, comes after a short sequence of the film in the orphanage, and features a ghoulish woman crouching on the end of Lucy's bed, whose hellish shriek leads to the picture's title card. Now I want to know from you, which movie do you think has the best opening credits? The ones where you watch and you still get freaked out every time you watch them? Well, make sure you let us know down in the comments, and you know the usual stuff, give us a like and a subscribe. Alright, now back to the list. Number 5. The Black Fae. Working with design studio Filmograph, Scott Derrickson crafted a killer opening credits sequence for his film The Black Fae, using a blend of archival footage, edited shots, and an alarm-like electronic score that descends and rises, all establishing the film's mystery and horror cred. The imagery of the sequence centers on missing person posters, empty streets, and injured children, accompanied by a shrill score masking sounds mimicking children's moans and screams. And the retro design, which employs sepia and vintage overlays and other post-production effects, captures not just the late 70s setting, but the pre-digital implications of the horrors that await. Of all the most chilling credits out there, this one is perhaps the most comprehensive in establishing its film's plot, style, tone, and aura of tension, the latter of which permeates our journey into the world of the Grabber, a psychotic child abductor who locks his captives in a room under his house with the titular Black Fae. Number 4. Under the Skin. Although director Jonathan Glazer's zone of interest is equally deserving of a place on this list, we are going to be slightly more purist with the definitions of horror, and settle instead for his adaptation of Michael Faber's Under the Skin. Built around an alien who abducts, consumes, and hollows out people from the streets of Scotland, the film is darkly atmospheric and off-kilter from the outset. Under the Skin begins pure black with offset plain white credits, followed by a speck of light that opens out from the screen's center to become an artificial glare. And artificial is the key word here, as it's not until the end of this sequence that we are in any way sure we're witnessing anything real or simulated, neatly reflecting the plot and themes of the movie. Like watching the birth of the universe, the images move from abstract eclipses to nuclei and starry constructions, with discordant sounds, which hit the ear like mechanical components at work, not unlike printers or typewriters, with the bustle of a crowded subway and human voices repeating indistinct words and sounds. Winding down on a match cut between what appears to be a camera lens and an improbably veinless brown human eye, the sequence concludes by switching abruptly to a sterile white screen, with plain text announcing the feature's title, "Consider Me Spooked." Number 3. Alien 3. Generally reviled by fans of the first two films, David Fincher's Alien 3 turned the space horror franchise moody and unforgiving, in a way its predecessors had never been. And the bleak disappointments begin, well, at the very beginning, opening with the titular aliens and making all of our fears of what could happen to our favourite characters come true before the picture has even begun. Unlike the other Alien movies, 3's monsters make themselves known during the opening credits, rather than, say, half an hour to 45 minutes in, after after a lot of build-up and misdirection. The titles feel like a piece from Ridley Scott's original, bold white text suspended in outer space. But here they are intercut with clips of a stowaway alien egg, and thus Facehugger on the USS Sulaco, picking up where James Cameron's Aliens left off. We can't help but watch in horror as Hicks, Newt, and Ripley all lie in stasis, helpless against attack, impregnation, and the crashing of their ship, as Elliot Goldenthal's ethereal yet menacing score ascends, pairing synths with orchestral strings and angelic choral vocals, neatly reflecting the majesties and horrors of space as one. Number 2. Sinister. Sinister's opening credits, well, they get right to it. The title credits open on the hanging of a family of 4, presented on a reel of Super 8 home video, apropos of nothing. With sacks over their heads, we are cut off from all of their identifying emotions and humanity, something reinforced by the absence of any meaningful diegetic sound. And yes, it turns out that a silent, featureless death is far scarier than a loud, panicked one. There is no commentary and no explanation, leaving us feeling helpless and afraid, but not half as afraid as when we notice the handsaw moving of its own accord, severing the branch that acts as the counterweight to the roped up family, which, upon breaking, carries them up to their doom. And the only textual identifier is some minimal scratched lettering along the image's bottom edge, announcing the film's title. It's short, it's brutal, and it sets up the series of bleak events that follow. Pretty much everything you need. Number 1. Evil Dead Rise. At this point, it's tradition to resurrect the Evil Dead franchise once every decade or so, lining up a new director and letting them go to town on the much-loved property, bringing new flavors, frights, and fun to the ever-evolving franchise. Evil Dead Rise is no different, and director Lee Cronin worked alongside composer Stephen McKeown to give us a few things we'd never seen or heard before. Foremost amongst these new dark delights is the opening title sequence, which is tremendously affecting for something so brief. Coming straight off the back of a lakeside double murder/possession, the titles take us by surprise. Appropriately enough, the possessed Jessica rises from the lake, suspended above it for a few tantalizing seconds, while blood-red titles rise from behind the lakeside forest. See what they did there? Rise? Quite literally breathtaking, the score works together with the graphics, which contain images of faces from the pages of the Necronomicon to overwhelm and disorient. In McKeown's score, a great sudden swell of strings that feels like the real-life equivalent from the THX scene from The Simpsons is imbued with demonic howls and a knife-like metallic scratching, promising awful things to come. Honestly, it doesn't get much better than this.